Hey everyone, it's Horror Free For All, and today I'm bringing you my top 10 favorite Tales from the Darkside episodes. Now, for me, Tales from the Darkside, I recently watched all original 90 episodes of the show, plus 3 bonus episodes, 2 of which came from a failed spinoff called Night Rose that's included on this box set here. Those episodes were Akbar's Daughter and Attic Suite. And then a fan-made episode that got George Romero's wife's approval years later by a fellow named Jason Quadrado on YouTube called The Soot Man. I went ahead and added that in as well. So really there was 93 overall episodes I watched and ranked and reviewed, and my season 1 through 4 rankings. If you want to go watch those videos, I'll put a link down in the description, and I'll also put the link for Jason Quadrado's Soot Man video in the description as well, because I definitely think all of you diehard Darkside fans need to check this out. I don't know if this would be the best syndicated horror show, and when I'm eventually done watching through all of these, but I had a blast with this show. It has its up and downs. Had some episodes I absolutely hated, but then I had ones that I loved. And to kick it off, I have some honorable mentions here I want to share with you, because there was like 18 episodes that I actually full on loved from the show. And I'm going to play a little slideshow here for you just so you can enjoy it. Now, with my honorable mentions out the way, let's get into it. My top 10 favorite Tales from the Darkside episodes. My number 10, I guess I'll start here, is episode 3 overall. It comes from season 1, and it's called I'll Give You a Million. This episode is written by John Harrison, who went on to direct the Tales from the Darkside movie in 1990. He also is a main show writer, and he's also a director on the new Creepshow anthology show. And the connection John Harrison has to the Creepshow franchise really shows in this episode. This was one I ranked originally lower in my season 1 ranking, but after season 2, I did bump up a few season 1 episodes because I didn't really know how to gauge the show at that time. And this one was one I bumped up to a 4 out of 5 stars, which is like very good. But it ended up being the top of the 4 out of 5 stars after all said and done. All those honorable mentions were 4 out of 5 stars as well. So it's like splitting hairs here. But this one manages to make my top 10 because of the heart and soul put into this episode. It's essentially a story about 2 old men. They're very rich. They like to make ridiculous bets with each other. And one wants to buy the soul of the other. The man agrees to sell his soul, but ends up getting sick and realizing that he's close to death, and he wants to buy his soul back, and he buys it back for double the money that the man bought it from. And after he dies, that might play a factor into some regrets that this man has, because now he's wanting to sell his soul back, or give it back to the man, because something more sinister might be after it. It's very schlocky near the end of the story. And it screams Creepshow in a lot of ways. This is my first pick as a honorary Creepshow episode. It's hard to explain. If you're a fan of the Creepshow franchise and you've seen this episode, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's just something about it. It has some layers to it, like regrets of life, making ridiculous bets. You should only make bets that you're good on, or ones that you can actually honor, right? It kind of comes to talk about how people take for granted the things in life that make you full, and the things that maybe carry over into the afterlife as well. And not to boot, the villain and the gore near the end was really fun. I enjoyed this episode thoroughly. It's in a lot of people's favorites for sound reasons. This is one of the episodes that got me hooked on the show immediately. Now, unfortunately for season 1's case, it didn't hold up that consistency of this episode for the most part. But this one is still, it lives in my head rent free, and I love it. So that's why it's my number 10. At number 9 we have an episode from season 4. It was episode 74 overall, and it's called The Moth. Now, The Moth was written by Michael McDowell. He was one of the main show writers of the Tales from the Darkside TV show. He would also go on to helm the writing role of a story in the Tales from the Darkside movie. He would also write an episode for that shortly pitched Nitro show, and I think he wrote some Monsters episodes as well. Michael McDowell has a real talent here, and what makes me gravitated to this story is not only the acting performances and the premise, but it's just the core message to the story, right? It's essentially about this woman who's torn between her love of her daughter and doing the right thing. Her daughter may or may not be a witch, and after doing some sleuthing around her house, has found some witchcraft paraphernalia that might accentuate that her daughter is actually a witch, right? Well, her daughter one night comes home with a wound, and it's a fatal wound, and it means that she's going to die. And the daughter's like, I'm going to die, but I'm not going to necessarily be gone. If I make it to the next morning, I'll be fine. I'll be resurrected, essentially. And the mom wants to help her daughter, but realizes that she's an evil being, and she goes through this struggle trying to handle this manifestation of evil that has come out of her daughter when she's died. And you find out what results of that. Now, the reason why I gave this a 4.25 out of 5 stars and not a 5 out of 5 stars, because this quite possibly could have been the best episode of the show for me, is the ending. The ending is just not what I wanted to see come out in the end result. Somebody wins that shouldn't win. Let's just say that. But aside from that, this was just a well-told, thought-provoking story. And the main thing to get across is how far are you willing to go for the ones you love, and how far are you willing to let the ones you love walk all over you. It's that kind of story. I love it for what it is. I just wish the ending was better, but it's in my top 10, and I can't recommend it enough. Now at number 8, we have the pilot episode, which technically is in season 1. It was the first episode ever of the show, and it's called Trick or Treat. This episode was written by George Romero, and there's so much I can praise about this episode, but also, very similarly to The Moth, the ending holds this back from being a perfect 5 out of 5 episode, if I'm being honest. The episode completely takes me out of it. But the story itself is so unique, and you can dissect a lot of what the story is trying to say, and that's why I think it's one of the best. The story's about this man. He runs a general store inside of this small town of sorts, and he loves to take on IOUs from families and put them in, cyclic debt. Let's just say that. Where they can never get out of debt, and they keep borrowing money from him, and he keeps charging interest, and he makes a game out of it. Every Halloween, since he's a massive fan of the holiday, he'll invite the families that owe him money, specifically the children of those families, to come inside and tour his haunted house of sorts. And if they're able to find the stack of IOUs, their family will be rid of their debt. And he takes pride in messing with these families, and he decorates his house all spooky, and he has his elaborate contraptions where he can ensure that those IOUs won't be found, because he hides them in really smart places. Well, one Halloween, and he's trying to do this, some visitors come to pay him a visit that might be supernatural. And they have their own game to play with him. And there might be some comeuppance for the families. And it exposes the man's greed and his just hostility to being a pleasant person and all of it. And the ending is just probably one of the best endings of the whole show, if I'm being honest. And at least in the way it wraps up. Not how it handles the revelations and all that. That's the bad part. But it's iconic at the very end of it, I will say. This is a thought-provoking episode with a fun aesthetic to it. You got the Halloween setting. You got a spooky haunted house with fun decorations. You have a unique plot, great acting going all over the board, great monster effects. And then the story, when you peel it back, it's about greed. It's about playing with people. It's about doing right by your community. And it's about possibly how your community can manifest the righteousness of other forces to come handle you. You know, it's pretty much the power of community, I would say, that comes across here. Very impactful story. One of the most iconic from the show. I've seen a lot of people say that this is the best episode, and if you're more forgiving on the ending, I can totally understand that. But for me, it's my number 8. I love this episode still, though. Don't get me wrong. Just like I said, the ending kind of muffles it for me. Now, at number 7, this might be kind of controversial, but this is the fan-made episode that I have linked in the description of this video. This was episode 93, technically. I put a star next to that because it's not really a season 4 episode, but I say that it's an honorary season 4 episode. It's the final one, to me at least, and it's called The Soot Man. The Soot Man was written and also directed by a man named Jason Quadrado. And I've already mentioned that George Romero's wife gave the 2 thumbs up permission for this episode as an honorary fan tribute to Romero's show. And after watching this is an entirely computer animated episode. I treat this like Tales from the Darkside's animated special. It seems like Tales from the Crypt had one, Creepshow has some. Why not allow this to be canon, you know? I ask all of you Darkside fans, please go check this out, and please understand why it's at my number 7. This is just a creepy episode through and through. It's such a unique idea. I think it's more of a creepypasta type of story, but if I had to be honest, if there was a Tales from the Darkside revival these days, I feel like creepypasta writers would be great source material to revive a Tales from the Darkside type of show, because it's just so many talented people go unnoticed in that community, and this is just a great example. This story is essentially an urban legend, but with a cautionary element to it. This woman and her boyfriend are thieves, and they're staking out this mansion that has like this old recluse living inside of it, and she has a fortune inside of the house. And the woman's job is to get hired by this old lady to go inside, help her clean and stake out the place, find the money, steal it, and they can then take the money, get out of Dodge, and use it, right? But when she goes there on her first day, after being hired by this woman, the woman is kind of crazy. At least it comes across. And she's telling the girl about this urban legend called the Soot Man that lives inside the fireplaces of her home, and that the dust particles that are around the house need to be cleaned vigorously, or the Soot Man can travel with the dust. And the girl kind of scoffs at this idea, but files it in the back of her brain. And throughout the rest of the story, she gets progressively more hostile working with this woman. She might have to do something horrible to this old woman, but after doing so, she gets her boyfriend involved, and the boyfriend sets off this chain of reaction that might bring on the Soot Man. And the Soot Man design, for it being a computer animated story using the Unreal Tournament game engine that was used for a lot of games back on the original Xbox and Xbox 360, it looks very good for what it is most of the time. My only negative with this story, honestly, is the inconsistency with the computer graphics, but the ADR and the voice acting and the creativity and the settings they were able to put in the episode were spectacular. And the concept alone of the Soot Man and how he operates is fucking eerie, man. One of the creepiest episodes. Definitely a fitting tribute in my eyes and worthy enough of being on this top 10 list. I don't care what people say. Alright, at number 6, in my opinion, is the most underrated and underappreciated episode from the whole show. And it was the final episode of Season 2. It was episode 48 overall. And it's called The Cassavan Curse. This story was written by Edith Swenson. And Edith Swenson, like Michael McDowell, wrote majority of the episodes in the show. And she is quite possibly an understated legend in the anthology horror community. Her stories, for the most part in the show, were consistent as hell. She produced a lot of my favorites, even my top favorite, and I'll get into that when I get to it at my number 1 slot. But this story is one of those episodes from the show that just has that shock value. And I think that the reason why I put this so highly, kind of like I'll Give You a Million, right? This episode just screams Creepshow to me. And it's not in the traditional sense where it's like so schlocky and you know, kind of just a weird idea that probably shouldn't work on paper, but it's told with a deep message, and that's what makes it work thematically. Thus, the ridiculousness allows the viewer to put some disbelief at the door. This one is a bit more grounded in like typical folk legend of like gypsy lore and stuff. But the monster design is just simple, and it works splendidly well. The story essentially is about this woman who has possibly murdered this man or her lover brutally, and it kicks off the episode like that. And she is going under this investigation, trying to figure out what happened. She has no memory or recollection, but she's the prime suspect. And all these people get involved. Her cousin comes to visit her, and it's revealed over the course of the episode that her family, that goes back like generations and generations, go back to this one ancestor who divorced a gypsy woman, and this gypsy woman has placed a curse on all of that man's descendants, to where every time they fall in love or have romantic feelings for them, something crazy comes through their genes and possesses them to want to kill their lovers. And it's a fucking creepy episode. And there's a fun little plot twist with a character that may or may not be involved with this story in a deeper way that I didn't actually see coming until near the final few minutes. It was a very fun episode. My only problem with this story, essentially, comes down to the layers of the story. Yeah, it's a layered story in the sense that you can look at it like this is coming to talk about you have to deal with the atrocities of your ancestors. You have to be the person to bear the consequences for your ancestors' decisions. That's a common topic brought up today, and that's the main thing I get from this episode. And while that's good and all, I don't think it's done as layered as it could have been. There's a lot of missed opportunities with the story. And like I said, it could have been way more violent than it was. It was almost like a supernatural slasher, almost like a proto-slasher, like those drive-in era movies that you would have seen in the early 70s. But yeah, this story was just so much fun. Great acting all the way around. Solid monster idea. It was creepy. It did what it needed to do. And that, to me, is what I'm looking for in anthology horror, but also in this show. For the most part, and it's not always that consistent. You will see an episode on here that kind of defies that, but I had a blast with this episode. I think it's easily, like I said, the most underrated Tales from the Darkside episode. All right. At number 5, we have episode 62 overall. This comes from season 3. This episode was the only episode adapted from a DC comic. Yes, out of all the stories, whether we're talking about the ones adapted from magazines, from short story collections, written for the show specifically in treatments, this one was the only one taken from a comic book. And the story is called My Ghostwriter, the Vampire. Now this story was written by Scott Edelman, and I actually have the comic here that it was pulled from. This is a Bronze Age DC comic. I think it came from the mid-1980s. It's Unexpected 197. And on the cover there, you can see My Ghostwriter, the Vampire. Right? This is the story that was turned into an episode. I will say this. My bias to loving Creepshow might play a role into this. But also, I see this as not only a love letter to gothic horror, right? But this is a love letter to comic book horror, comic book anthology horror. You know, the groundwork of what made Creepshow was the fact that it was paying respect to those Atomic Age EC comics, mainly Vault of Horror and Tales from the Crypt. But a lot of people tend to forget that Atomic Age Horror also produced other series that got bought up by Marvel and DC in the late 50s and early 60s that they later retooled in the Bronze Age, the Bronze Age into the Copper Age, right? To turn into, their properties and their interpretations of this old Atomic Age style of comic storytelling. And My Ghost Rider the Vampire not only has that comic book feel from that Atomic Age, but it also has that gothic feel, like I said. And it's perfect for this show. And that's why I think my Creepshow bells go off here, because it's the only one based on a comic, and it actually is a fun reimagining of the vampire trope. Essentially, the story is about this hack job writer who really has no original thoughts, original ideas. He likes to rip off other people, and he takes pride in that. He is on a dry spell, and he gets visited by this vampire in his nice, luxurious apartment. And the vampire makes a proposition with him that he will give the man 900 years worth of vampire legends that no man has ever heard, because vampires have been keeping these secrets under lock and key for years, and man only knows what they know by experiences directly with them. And in exchange, all he wants is to live at the apartment. And the guy's like, all right, this is too good to pass up. So throughout the episode, he's taken down the stories of this vampire, but there's also a price involved with that. He has to produce some food for the vampire so he doesn't get eaten, And there's some consequences involved with that. There's some thoughts of cold-blooded murder, and the guy's like, all right, maybe I shouldn't do this, but, my career's more important. And then after he's able to satisfy the vampire long enough, he's able to collect the stories and publish them, and he gets famous. And then he's went on to collect so many stories that he has so many books worth that he feels like he doesn't need the vampire anymore. And he tries to double-cross the vampire. But the vampire, what makes it unique than other vampire stories is that there's a subversion here with the typical vampire tropes that kill vampires and stuff. There's an added element that if the vampire dies, there's certain ways to bring him back. So he can't really stay dead, right? And that might be the secret to how this vampire's lived for as long as he has, right? And the guy kind of forgets that, but tries to double-cross him anyway. And there's some grisly body horror with the vampire that's pretty good. Mildly tame, but still pretty good. And the guy thinks he's won, but this is a comeuppance tale. That's why I also think it's like Creepshow. And something may happen to the man. Gets what's coming to him. And the episode wraps up kind of ambiguously, but in a good way, right? This is just a fun episode from start to finish. I think this is also another candidate where I think this is an underrated episode from the show. This just captures everything I would want in a spiritual successor to Creepshow, like people have said this show is advertised to be. This is probably the prime example to that, minus my number one. But yeah, this is just a fantastically made episode. My only negative with it is how corny it can be at times. Yes, it does lean into some vampire cliches here and there. A little too much. And the ending, it's not bad. It's just not the greatest. But other than that, I definitely think people need to give more respect to this episode. It's so great. Alright, at my number 4 slot. This got the same score as My Ghost Rider the Vampire and The Kasabin Curse at a 4.5 out of 5 stars. But this is a little bit on the higher end. I've loved this episode ever since I saw it in Season 1. It was episode 10 overall. And this one kind of defies the pattern here. But it's just so memorable for all the right reasons. And it's A Case of the Stubborns. This was a story by Robert Bloch. This was the first one of his in the show. I think he went on to do or have 2 other stories of his adapted in the show. But this one is just so much fucking fun. It's essentially a very simple story, right? This boy and his mom are grieving the loss of the mother's father and the boy's grandfather, right? But the grandfather doesn't want to stay dead. He comes back to life after he's been dead, and he has no pulse. He's not alive. His skin is purpling, and there's blood vessels showing on his face. But they're mortified and kind of intrigued at the fact that he's up and walking. But it's over time in the episode explained that he just has the will to live and the stubbornness to stay alive, that he just doesn't want to admit that he's dead, right? And he needs convincing, right? And the whole episode, he goes on his porch, he gets visited by doctors, by neighbors, by a priest, and they all are freaked out by this, and rightfully so. But you see his physical state just deteriorating throughout this episode, and he gets progressively more and more and more disgusting. But there's heartfelt moments with him and his grandson, and there's a sense of like holding on and stuff, and the ending is pretty much what the story is building up to, is that point where the man finds the evidence he needs. And let's just say it's schlocky, but in all the best ways possible. This is good schlock, right? This story has some layers to it. You peel back, not only regrets in life, but you're peeling back, the willingness to live, right? If you're put into a situation even after death where you're given an opportunity to still walk among the living, would you do it? And what are the motivations by people doing it? If I were to write a story, if I was Robert Bloch, I would probably lean into the same direction he took with this, because the man is pretty much defined by his stubbornness and his love of his family. And he's just a hard-headed individual, and he's tough to break through to. And I kind of think in like a metaphorical way, somebody who's lost grandparents. This story, I think, kind of like helped me heal a little bit with losing them. I only lost them like a few years ago, but I have like a personal connection to this episode, and it's something like, if you experience that or something similar to that in your life, I think you can definitely see the charm in this story. There's just something about it. The acting is superb. It's some of the best acting in the whole show. And I think that helps kind of sell it too for me. But this one, just a fun one. It's just so memorable, and it's very commendable. It's not quite my top three. My top three are pretty much the ones I really love from the show. Like these are my absolute favorites. But it's close. It's close to that. All right, now entering my top three. At number 3, we have an episode from season 1. It was episode 8 overall. It's called Inside the Closet. Inside the Closet was written by Michael McDowell. This is another Michael McDowell episode on my top 10. This is my favorite one of his. I gave this like a 4.75 out of 5 stars. It was so close to being perfect, if not for the weird ending. The weird ending is a little too ambiguous for my taste. I kind of wish it was more direct. But it's just such an iconic story. This has that creep show factor. I've already brought it up with I'll Give You a Million. I brought it up with The Cost of Curse, my Ghost Rider the Vampire. This one has that element to it. I think Tom Savini provided the monster effects for this episode. And in my opinion, this has the best monster effects in the entire series. Without a shred of a doubt. Even better than my number 1. And my number 2, which have really great monster effects. But this episode is just so damn creepy. And it's one of those things that this does horror very well, right? The story is essentially about this woman who's taking an ad in the paper to find a place to live. She finds this man who's living alone in this really old house, and she has a room upstairs that used to be his daughter's room, but his daughter may or may not be dead, and may or may not have died in the house, right? So, throughout the episode, she's experiencing this weird phenomenon in her bedroom, nearby this closet, and let's just say, she goes to great lengths to try to see if something's in there watching her, if something's, possibly living in there, and there's some mindfuckery going on, whether if she's peering into a different reality at certain times, because sometimes the closet would be decorated with stuff and sometimes it won't be. And there's a chilling revelation near the end, and something grisly might happen with this girl, and there might be some context with what's inside the closet and the man who lives there. It's just a shocking story. I mean, if I saw this episode as a kid, this is definitely, well, I can say this for a lot of these, but if I saw the episode as a kid, I would have been traumatized by this monster. And when I say this monster is fucking insanely creepy. I mean that. This was fantastic. Honestly, if I look at the original Creepshow monsters, right? Look at all the effects there. Some schlocky monsters here and there. Some great looking monsters here and there as well. Some iconic ones like the Crate Monster, right? But this, oh my god. This is like movie quality stuff. And it's just one of those things that just stick with you. This episode constantly sticks with me. Since I've watched this, I've had a nightmare about this monster, at least once. So that should tell you something. I'm a grown-ass man. I'm getting nightmares from this. It's great. It's genuinely great. Now, my number 2, honestly, it has the same score as Inside the Closet at a 4.75, but if I really wanted to, I could give this a 5. And in a lot of ways, I kind of lean back and forth on that, but for the sake of, honesty here, I'm going to keep it at that score. This was from Season 3. It was the first episode overall. It was episode 49 in the show in total, and it's called The Circus. The Circus was written by Sydney Bounds, and this episode, guys, this was just one of the most riveting stories in the whole series, by far. Not only was the setting and the atmosphere great, but the idea of it just gets to me a little bit, right? There's a lot to peel back. So the story is about this reporter who goes to this carnival, or circus of sorts, to interview this man who runs the circus. And he has some choice words to say to him, but he's waiting for the right moments to say these things to him. And when he meets the circus ringleader, he's asking questions about what kind of things go on at the circus, and if these things are true, or if these are just paid actors. And throughout the story, the circus may or may not have vampires, a Frankenstein's monster, a mummy, a werewolf, right? And the revelations that this man comes to is that this ringleader is subjecting kids and families to come pay money to be put in danger by these things. And not only that, there's some thought-provoking stuff about animal cruelty in this, and that's more of a subtext layer to it, but that's still there in the episode. And this man, he critiques the ringleader, and he may or may not become a part of the carnival himself in his own sideshow, freak show kind of way. And that's pretty much the story. And that might not sound like there's a lot to it, but you have to realize that this episode is just a love letter as well. Like, there's a couple of episodes in the show that are just outright love letters, but this one is just paying homage to those old, 1800s stories that laid the groundwork for modern horror. And not only that, there's something about the premise of this that gets to me personally. I am creeped out by circuses and carnivals. I can't tell you what it is. I love going to them. They're some of my favorite settings in the horror genre. I collect those type of stories for a reason. But this story in particular, while it might not have the most expansive budget, the monsters designs in this are some of the best of the entire show. And it's truly chilling. I mean, you can really feel the main character discovering the horrors of this place as this story goes along, and you really get this fucked up sense of what's really going on. and like I said, you peel back the layers. You can peel back the ethics of treatment of animals. You can peel back the ethics of subjugating children to potentially dangerous things that can get them killed, right? And it kind of goes into the whole thought process for me in terms of theme attractions in general, right? When you go to an amusement park and you ride a roller coaster, you're putting yourself in danger. You're putting yourself at risk that this stuff might malfunction and might be able to kill you. But you still do it because you go for the thrills. You go for the chills, right? What makes this any different? And if we live in a hypothetical world where these monsters were real, would that be acceptable ethically, right? Are there ways to mistreat monsters that can kill humans? Are they higher on the food chain? And if so, should we be ethically considering them? There's a lot of things you can think about. And it like I said, it can go off into a spider web. And you wouldn't think that on the surface of this episode, but it just brings that out of your brain. And it sticks with me more so than a lot of these other episodes from I would say, better anthology shows, which I can say as a compliment to this story. It's just, it sticks with you. It's one of the most memorable from the show. And I could totally understand, for a lot of people who put this at number 1, why it's there. But it's not my number 1. And my number 1 is my only 5 out of 5 star episode I gave in this show. Right? And it comes from season 4. It was episode 86 overall. And it is called Family Reunion. Now, Family Reunion is an episode written by Edith Swenson. And she made, or at least wrote, my favorite story. This is just an emotional story. I guess there's some layers to it. If you're a parent or you're in the business of childcare, what are the correct ways to help a child going through a tough time, right? But this has that monster layer to it, where the kid might be something supernatural, and one parent thinks that there's one way to handle it, and another parent thinks there's another way to handle it, and it's just an emotional story. It goes down that route, but on the layers of superficialness of it, there's an obvious love letter to George Romero's and Stephen King's Creepshow, the original movie. The kid has posters of it in his room. You know, there's so much of that Creepshow element in the story that I think this would be a Creepshow worthy segment as well. And that's my 5th of the Creepshow like ones in my top 10. And that's a common theme, because I was actively looking for those in the show. If I'm being honest with you all, that's what I was kind of looking for, as like a Creepshow successor or the continuation, right? From what I've heard from people. And this one would easily fit in the modern Creepshow show. But just to give you an idea what the story's about, right? It's about this father who we see caging his son up in this room somewhere. And the son may or may not have lycanthropy, where he can turn into a werewolf. And the father is going through this whole ordeal of his love with his son, but trying to cure him and trying to wait out time to see if he can help cure his son. Meanwhile, the boy's mom is dealing with a social worker and trying to figure out course of action to take with the dad, so she can make sure her son's okay, and possibly that she can get her son out of that situation. And the mom is revealed to be a part of the situation that caused the boy to get lycanthropy, and that was revealed in the story at some point. But it all comes to fruition when the social worker and the mom find out where the dad's hiding, and the dad is not willing to give up without a fight, and it's a very emotional struggle of these two parents, and one may end up getting the upper hand. There's a body count in the episode, and it's kind of a bittersweet kind of thing, because you feel bad for the people involved, but it ends on a lighthearted note, at least for what it was, and it has that schlocky factor to it as well. But I definitely think the schlockiness was handled probably the best in the show here, to where I can kind of give it a pass. Because if I'm being honest, I do watch a lot of schlock, but that usually is a deterrent of me giving any story a high rating if the schlock is just too overbearing. But here it is perfectly balanced in an emotional story. The layers you could peel back, of course, would be you can like look at it from this perspective, like the dad feels like he's lost his son and wants his son back, and the mom just unconditionally loves her son and wants to do whatever it takes to have her son in whatever form he's in the way that she sees fit, right? And you can just look at it as like a two different parent styles clashing kind of story, and it's just very entertaining. It actually almost made me shed a tear. It just hit me. You know, I don't know what it is about it. It's just my favorite from this series. Yeah, especially given everything else I was presented. Yeah, this is definitely the highlight of the show for me. And that's just my opinion. Some people might disagree with that. But like I said, I invite everyone. If you disagree with my top 10, you can leave whatever comment you want down in the comment section. You can tell me your top 10 episodes. Which ones do you think are underrated? Which ones do you think are probably overrated? Do you have any least favorite episodes? If you want to share those here too, feel free. What are your thoughts on the show overall? I just want to hear your thoughts about this. Relatively obscure, but classic and just fun overall show, Tales from the Dark Side. Yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.